On a normal night, people begin to die from a virus, which causes cars to spin out of control and planes to crash, and thus the end of the world approaches because of vampires. Boom. But apparently this virus did not affect these little children who are our main characters, because apparently children under 13 years of age are not affected by this deadly virus, and so some people, or rather vampires from the direct unit of the third progenitor Krill Teps, will put those children under their protective custody. Thus thousands of trucks full as children they left Tokyo or I don't know which city, but it's from Japan, and after all this catastrophe, 4 years passed, and you show us a small city where many children live, who are always watched by these hooded soldiers, who are doing a search, and thus reveal to us that the protagonist is called Yuichiro and his best friend Michaela. And after this search they put them in a kind of room where they draw blood. As I said before, these people are vampires. Well, the fact is that the protagonist is up to his mini peanut of these people, and wants to get out of here. Instead Michael tells him to relax, that this is better than nothing, and due to various situations in life, the protagonist almost messed it up by attacking some vampire soldiers. But thanks to this name, a friend of Michaela's, they did nothing to him. And well, if you wonder, these nobles are very strong people who have a higher rank than vampire soldiers, and especially this nobleman named Farid is a close friend of Michaela. Well, Michaela is his death dish, since Michaela offers him her blood in his mansion in exchange for something that Michaela asks for, and the protagonist, knowing that, gives him a mini punch. Kawaii, because what he does is wrong. Well, I didn't tell you something, and it's because at the beginning the children were together because they all lived in the same place since they were in an orphanage, and we only know that the main character was there because his mother left suicide and his father tried to kill him because he was a supposed demon. Well, then everyone has dinner, that is, the main character's family, since the vampires let them live separately except for Michaela, and apparently they will have curry for dinner thanks to him because he brought it. You know how. But hey, the main character did not eat and decided to wait for him until he came because they all fell asleep, except for him, and once Michaela came, she prepared the curry for them both to eat and showed him a gun and a map of the entire city that she got thanks to being in the nobleman's house, since she did this to be able to escape as well. Well, apparently they are not yet 13 years old, so the virus will not affect them, and the escape plan starts now. Once the bulls woke up, they set off, because thanks to the map they know where the exit is. And after several hours walking they finally reach the exit door to return to their world and leave the city of vampires. But once they are close, Farid appears and begins to kill each one of the protagonist brothers. Michaela, seeing that, decides to sacrifice herself, and thus only the protagonist managed to escape through my tears, and the protagonist managed to get out. And some humans appear and say the prophecy was true. A test subject will come out of the Hyakuya vampire laboratory. And then he says, "Young man, we will use you to eradicate the vampires," and the protagonist accepts because he and they want to eliminate each one of them. And so 4 years go by. We see the main character walking through a destroyed city in Japan with a uniform and a sword. The day the main character escaped, he was saved by Lieutenant General Gurren, and he told him that he would help him get power. But the main character was 4 years old. Later, the protagonist is upset that Gurren has not helped him at all. The main character is a troublesome boy who does not obey orders in the army. And now he has been suspended from the army. In class, he causes a lot of fuss, and a girl named Shinoa is supervising him because Gurren has asked him to. In order for the protagonist to return to the army, he has to make a friend, and he cannot attack civilians. When they are leaving school, the protagonist meets a boy named Yoichi who is being bullied by some boys, and decides to help him, but the protagonist ends up harming himself since he cannot hit them. Yoichi later tells the protagonist that he asked one of those abusers to speak well of him so that they give him a second chance to enter the Lunar Demon Company. Actually, that abuser is lying, since he wants to take revenge on the vampires for that vampires killed her sister. Suddenly, there is an explosion, and it turns out that it was caused by a vampire that has escaped from the laboratory. So the protagonist decides to go and defeat the vampire. In short, the main character can't defeat the vampire, since to defeat a vampire you need a demonic sword that can curse and kill them, and the main character has a normal sword. But Gurren appears and saves the main character. A while later, the protagonist and Yoichi become friends, and surprisingly accept the protagonist and Yoichi into the vampire killing force, for having helped in the vampire's case. Days later, a friend of those bullies is in a restricted area of a euro, the school where pacts are made with demons, and those bullies ask Yoichi and the protagonist to save their friend, since he entered that restricted area a long time ago and still has not returned. And the protagonist accepts the mission. Later, the protagonist arrives at the place with his compa and finds the person he has to save paralyzed. In order not to make it too long, I only tell you that the protagonist, after much suffering, manages to save him. Days later, the protagonist enters the demonic school, and there supposedly he will be able to have his demonic weapon and he will be able to defeat the vampires. Meanwhile, it turns out that Mika is alive. But now he's a vampire and he's on the side of the vampires, or so it seems. Well, let me explain it better. When we were little, in the main character's escape plan, the main character shot a noble vampire. But he did absolutely nothing to the noble vampire. Since the bullets are not demonic and they are not cursed, the thing is, the leader of the normal and noble vampires, Cruel, gave her blood to Mika when she was on the ground about to die. And when a vampire gives blood to a human, the human becomes a vampire, and can live forever. Obviously Cruel gave the blood to Mika treacherously. We return to the present. The protagonist is doing a test against some demon dolls. But the test has to be done in pairs, and the protagonist's partner doesn't get along with the protagonist, and the protagonist doesn't get along with his partner named Shiho. Well, while they were in the middle of the test, they call Shiho telling her that her sister is very serious right now, and it turns out that Shiho's sister is infected with that virus. But Shiho doesn't want to go see her, because she wants to get the best grades and join the demonic army, since what they told her is that the army contains the cure to save her sister. And obviously the protagonist gives an emotional speech to Shiho, making Shiho change her mind and want to go see her sister. On the other hand, Cruel has decided to put an end to the demonic army, which means that a war is coming, and they call that war the Seraphin of the End. It reads like that, but I don't think it's written like that XD. Days later, they give the theoretical exam notes to the protagonist, and something predictable that was going to happen is that he failed the exams, and in effect he got 0. Minutes later, while the protagonist is arguing with Shiho, Gurren comes with his sword demonic, draw out his power, to see who can stand, so he knows who can go make a pact with a demon now and get a demonic weapon. In short, the protagonist, Shinao, Shiho and Yoichi manage to stay standing, so now they go to the place where they will make the pact. But while they are going, Gurren asks Yoichi if he thinks he can make the pact with the demon, since he is weak, and if he tries to make the pact and fails, the demon will possess his body and he will die. When they arrive at the place, the protagonist chooses a sword, Shiho chooses 2 small swords, and Yoichi chooses a bow. First, the protagonist tries to make a pact with the devil, and he succeeds, so he can already defeat vampires. When the protagonist wakes up, he realizes that Shiho has also succeeded. Now only Yoichi is missing. Inside his imagination, his demon is scaring the __ out of him, as he still hasn't gotten over his past, until suddenly the demon possesses Yoichi's body. After a hard fight against Yoichi in the form of a demon, the protagonist and Shiho manage to make Yoichi become him again, and thus Yoichi manages to make the pact with the demon. Now everyone can fight vampires. Meanwhile, Mika together with more vampires are on a plane heading to a city in Japan to attack it. The next day, the first mission of the protagonist team begins, which is made up of the protagonist, Yoichi, Shinoa, Shihao, and they are also joined by a new girl named Mitsuba. His mission is to find where a human hideout is near a vampire village. In the middle of the road, a girl chased by a monster appears and the protagonist rushes to save the girl, but Mitsuba stops him, telling him that it is a trap made by the vampires, and that if he is going to save the girl he will break the formation and put endangering the whole team. She tells him that because in her past life she was like the main character, and one of those days she broke the formation of her team and got a member of her team killed. Obviously the main character doesn't even care case and he rushes to save the girl. But when he manages to save her, some vampires come and attack him. In the end, the vampires escape, since they could not fight them. Later, the protagonist and his friends take a shower, and when they finish the girl tells them where the vampire lair is, where the humans are. The next day, they have already arrived at the place and they find the humans. But later many vampires come and it turns out that the information the girl told them is somewhat false. But well, details that don't matter. In short, they manage to defeat all the vampires and manage to save those humans. Later they continue on their way to Shinjuku, or as it was written. But in the middle of the way they come across a noble vampire. The noble vampires are very powerful and the protagonist along with his team try to face him, but more vampires come and they have less chances of winning. Magically the vampires have to retire and the protagonist together with his team manage to save themselves. Later, the team of the protagonist is already together with the other soldiers of the Japanese team, and the war between humans and vampires has already begun. In the battle, there is Mika, who is there to go see the protagonist. Here's a fact about Michaela. As a child, when he became a vampire, he had to drink human blood to survive, but he didn't want to since he didn't think it was right to drink human blood. So Cruel decided to give him his blood to drink, but even so, vampire blood only gave him lasts 10 days to Mika. And also Mika sometimes has fits of wanting to drink human blood. Anyway, after the first wave of fighting, the protagonist and his team are in a truck and Shinoa gives them some pills that are used to increase power. Let's see, I'll explain. One pill is used to increase x10 power. Taking 2 pills can increase x100. But there is a possibility of dying, and taking 3 would break all your organs. We already know what the protagonist will do XD. Well, while they were so calm in the truck, they get attacked and they end up in a cave separated. After a while, they manage to get out of the cave. But the protagonist is with Shinoa and the others are in a park being attacked by some vampires, so the protagonist decides to go help them. Later, when they are all together, they find out that Gurren together with his squad is in a fight against the vampires and against a noble vampire named Farid. Who, by the way, Farid was the one who killed the protagonist's friends. And now Mika is in favor. His part, since Farid has eaten Mika's head and now Mika thinks that humans are the bad guys. When Gurren is being half pierced by Mika's sword, the angry protagonist appears with his companions. From how angry the protagonist is, he attacks Mika by running him through with his sword, and realizes that it is his friend Mika. Mika manages to walk away unscathed, as the protagonist did not activate the curse when he attacked Mika, and with normal injuries Mika can regenerate. On the other hand, Gurren is somewhat injured but still has the strength to get up and hit the protagonist for not having activated the curse to kill Mika. After a while nobles and more vampires come and now the situation is desperate for the protagonist and the others. Also, Mika asks the protagonist to escape together, and tells him that the humans are using him, but the protagonist does not want to since his companions are being turned to mush by the vampires and nobles. So Mika decides to catch the main character and not let him go with the humans, but suddenly the main character is with his demon, and the demon tells him that his demonic side is coming out, and the demon also tells the main character that the situation is over. It's going to be very bad. Well, currently the protagonist is crazy and has become a very powerful monster which is attacking everyone no matter who. But in the end, Shinoa manages to make the protagonist return to normal. Minutes later, more lieutenants and more members of the Moon Demon Company come to help Gurren and the others in battle. The vampires, seeing that the situation is going to get difficult for them, decide to retire. After that, the protagonist falls unconscious for a few days. 5 days later, Shinoa finds out that the enhancer pills given to the protagonist, she gave it to the protagonist before, but Lieutenant Gurren gave it to her to give to the protagonist, since the protagonist's sideburns are different from the protagonist's sideburns. The sideburns that they gave the protagonist had something that made him become the monster he became, and it was all part of a human experiment. But hey, it's something boring to tell that nobody cares about. 2 days later, the protagonist finally wakes up from his coma. We see how Gurren and Shinoa talk. The girl asks him what he did to Yoichi. He answers that his organization experimented with the protagonist using a forbidden enchantment. That's why our young man transformed into that horrifying and powerful creature. A few minutes later in a library, Shinoa discovers that the protagonist is looking for a way to turn Mika back into a human. She tells him that it is possible, but that it is very difficult, although she does not have such information. After that, the protagonist goes to see the Haragi family. Shinoa warns him to be careful with them because they are very cruel people. It is then that we meet Kureto, the leader of the Haragi family. When the protagonist meets him, they both have a fight because Kureto wants to know the capabilities of our young man. When the fight is over, Yu is taken to a room for interrogation. If he doesn't answer, his friends will suffer the consequences. Because I didn't tell you, Kureto has the protagonist's friends as prisoners. Our young man agrees to answer all of Kureto's doubts. During the interrogation, Yu is the most benefited because he finds out that he has always been seen as a test subject. Because the orphanage where he grew up belonged to the Hyakuga sect. Said group did mystical things, and experimented with the local children, including the protagonist. That is why he has hidden power within himself. In addition, he finds out that Gurren wants to use said power to defeat the vampires. When the protagonist answers the few questions that Kureto asked him, he confirms his suspicions. Then he offers Yoichi to be part of his group. Before answering, the protagonist asks that his friends be released. Our young man and his friends come out of the Haragi's lair. It is then that the protagonist meets Gurren. It is there that he tells him that the subject of the experiment is true. The protagonist does not get a little angry, but forgives him. Then the protagonist brings up the topic that interests him the most. and that is how to turn Mika into a human again. For her part, Mika continues to live with vampires where she avoids drinking human blood. Despite the fact that this decision causes her indescribable physical pain, one night, Yu trains to use the power of his sword. Let's remember that inside each person's weapon there is a demon. With said weapon they can defeat vampires. However, there is a level beyond. To achieve this ability, the wielders must offer their blood to the demon that inhabits the sword. In fact, one of the protagonist's friends mastered that ability in a short time. Our hero talks with his demon. This makes him a very difficult test. Despite this, our young man is not consumed by anger, and since then the demon on his sword becomes his ally. On the other hand, the vampires find out that humans managed to create the Awari no Seraph. That is, that power that the protagonist has hidden. That is why they plan to eradicate it. To all this, Farad is conspiring against Crew. Since the latter does not want to marry him, then, all the friends of the protagonist manage to pass the tests that his demons imposed on them and become stronger. Not to mention that they acquired more powerful abilities. For example, the protagonist can summon many magical katanas. The next day the characters meet and talk about Gurren. Apparently he wants to use the protagonist to start a rebellion against the High Command. That is, against Koreto. At the same time, Gurren and Koreto meet to talk. They talk about the carriers of black magic. When I say black magic I mean the hidden power that the protagonist has. They also discuss a possible coup by Gurren. But more importantly, Koreto sends Gurren to Nagoya with all his soldiers because he wants him to kill 10 of the 25 noble vampires there. Gurren accepts the mission. Following that, Gurren's demon appears, which coincidentally looks a lot like Shinoa, capable of being a familiar, and we can assume that it is his sister since she has a schoolgirl outfit. At the same time, Yu and his friends come to the conclusion that the most important thing is family, and that is why they will help Gurren in whatever he is planning. At the same time, Mika can't stand her bloodlust and sinks her fangs into Crew, who without hesitation leaves. Later, Mika asks him why he ordered all the orphans to be killed that time, but above all he wants to know the reason he let them live. Referring to himself and Yu, she tells him that they are both wielders of black magic, and mentions that she needs the Seraph at the end. Whatever that means. After answering his question, he informs him that in a month a total war between humans and vampires will begin. That is why he entrusts him with the mission to capture Yu. The blonde agrees to do it because he says that in this way he will be able to save Yu from humans and vampires. Back in Nagoya, Gurren gives his soldiers a motivational speech worthy of a great military general. Well, maybe because it is. Among the soldiers are Yu and his friends. Shortly before leaving for the battlefield, Gurren and his associates have a small exhibition match against Yu and his friends. As expected, the experienced defeat the novices like nothing. After that lesson, Gurren friendly tells Yu that he must become stronger if he wants to fight the nobles, followed by ruffling the protagonist's hair. The next day Nagoya's mission to exterminate 10 of the 25 noble vampires begins. The leading group faces off against Wesker, one of them. After a somewhat forgettable battle, Yu inflicts a mortal wound on the target. The vampire, seeing himself cornered, decides to take his own life of his own free will before dying at the hands of a human. Vampire stuff, I guess. On the other hand, Gurren's squad with much difficulty also manages to eliminate a noble vampire. Unfortunately they suffered a casualty during the fight. Before dying the soldier informs Gurren that a squad was utterly defeated at the town hall, and that the survivors were taken hostage by a vampire noble named Usford, the 13th progenitor. Whatever that means, the war against the noble vampires continues. 3 squads manage to exterminate their targets, including the protagonist group. The rest of the battalion is still on the move. Gurren decides to gather the 3 squads that arrived earlier to attack the town hall. He tells them that there are 3 noble vampires there, among them a very powerful one named Usford. The protagonist squad and the Gurren group begin to mobilize. However, one battalion stayed behind to update the rest of the soldiers on the situation. Suddenly some vampires appear and ambush them. Among them is Mika. He grabs one of the soldiers to question her. At that moment she gives the order for all the soldiers in the battalion to commit suicide with cyanide because they prefer to die than give him information to the enemy. However, Mika manages to prevent her prisoner from biting the poison. He tells her that her companions still do not know that she is alive, and that he will let her live if she answers all their questions. She tells him that she would rather die than sell one of her own, and Mika immediately replies violently that Yu is not an ally of humans. The young woman is shocked by the blonde's words. The soldier holds Mika hostage when he was distracted, and tells him that Yu is heading to the town hall. Mika puts on an expression of extreme concern upon hearing that. Well, in the end she asks Mika to kill her and he does so. With her last breaths the young woman says thank you. On the other hand, the protagonist group meets Usford. One of the protagonist's friends shoots a demonic arrow at him, but the vampire stops it as if nothing had happened. It is then that Gurren deduces that the subject is very powerful because even for a noble vampire to stop an attack of that magnitude is difficult. Seeing that attacking head-on they have no chance, Gurren and his soldiers decide to reorganize. For his part, Usford and his fellow noble vampires prepare to capture Gurren to take information from him, because Farid ordered them to. Well, the case is that Gurren organizes a plan to rescue the hostages and attack the town hall. Everything goes well and Gurren faces off against Usford. Although the latter is too strong, so strong that he defeats Gurren and his soldiers without a problem. Even with that, the commander does not give up and continues to face Usford with his sword. During the fight, Usford pierces Gurren's shoulder with his sword, at which point the nobleman says that next time he will be more careful since he does not plan to kill him, because he wants to ask him a couple of questions first. Suddenly the protagonist appears and attacks Usford with his sword. However, the vampire reacts in time and counterattacks, but the protagonist's friends protect him at the last second. The difficult battle against Usford ensues and is further complicated when the vampire's allies show up. Despite outnumbering their rival, the protagonists cannot defeat them and are forced to escape. And an important fact is that they left Gurren behind. Therefore, Usford fulfilled his objective, which was to capture the commander to get information from him. Returning to the demonic army base, Coretto receives a visit from a messenger who gives him a message from his father's army leader, that is, the Coretto's father. The message is not relevant. The important thing is that Coretto is going through the orders of the head of the organization. The messenger tells him that if he rebels against the leader he will be arrested. Coretto laughs and tells him that he will be the new head of the demon army. Followed by that he leaves and the messenger is frozen in shock. Returning to Nagoya, the leading group is now commanded by a friend of Gurren's. He orders them to continue with the next step of the mission because those are Gurren's orders. Our protagonist is very sad because he lost the only father figure he ever had. That is why after thinking about it for a bit, he decides to desert the squad and go to rescue Gurren. Which is why he takes 2 power-up pills which instantly destroy his entire body. Such is the internal damage that our young man begins to spit up blood. Everything seems to indicate that our young man is dead. On the other hand, but in the same place, Mika arrives at the town hall and before entering, she kills all her vampire allies. Meanwhile, Yu wakes up in a dream world where he talks to his demon. She tells him that due to the pills he took, all his internal organs were turned to dust. However, she comments that, although this dead man did not die, this was due to that the angels keep him alive. Presumably if there are demons there are also angels. Our hero in the distance sees a golden trumpet. He wants to use it to call the angels. However, she advises him not to because angels have a worse temper than demons. In the end, so that the protagonist does not contact the angels, she lends him her power and in this way our hero revives. With his powers increased, Yu heads to rescue Gurren. Later he faces Usford and loses again. Our hero wonders why he still can't beat him, and the vampire replies that cattle will always be won. Our hero upon hearing that word becomes enraged and lashes out at Usford again. However, the result is the same. Yu is overcome by greed and asks his demon for more power, which without hesitation he lends it to her since after all she feeds on Yu's greed. Thus, the protagonist partially transforms into a demon. Suddenly, one of the protagonist's friends appears, specifically the boy with red hair and glasses. He uses a special ability that drains the power of any individual to capture Yu before he does something stupid. After that he escapes from the place. All the soldiers from Gurren's battalion gather and plan to take shelter in the assembly center. While they were going there they run into Mika who notices Yu's presence. Thus, driven by the desire to save his friend from humans, the blonde faces the entire battalion just to rescue Yu. In the end, Mika is almost killed by one of the soldiers, but Shinoa protects him, claiming that if he were to die, Yu would be angry with them. The fact is that the protagonist's friends protect Mika and allow him to take Yu. After the blonde left with our hero in his arms, the vampire reinforcements attack Gurren's battalion. Many soldiers die, but the protagonist's friends don't. Gurren's soldiers, finding themselves overwhelmed by the situation, decide to escape and meet at the airport since a helicopter will save them there. When Yu opens his eyes he finds himself in an abandoned store, and a few seconds later he is reunited with his best friend Mika. He tells him that he suffers indescribable pain from not drinking blood, which is why our hero offers him his. The blonde kind of wants to do it, but he plays hard to get, as is to be expected at the end. Mika if she sucks Yu's blood. In this way, the blonde becomes a complete vampire. Even his eyes change color. Yu then tells him that it doesn't matter if he turned into a vampire because he will find a way to turn him back into a human. Later, Yu asks Mika for help in rescuing his friends from the battalion. He likes to, but he plays hard to get, and in the end he agrees to help. Thus, the friends get into a car to rescue the protagonist's friends. Along the way Mika throws all the plot data of the series at him, tells him that humans and vampires were experimenting on children. The whole world was involved in it. In the end everything went wrong, and due to that failure a disease was depleting the adult population. Mika tells him that now the demonic army, commanded by Coretto, resumed the experiments of the Awari no Seraph. Meanwhile, Gurren's battalion sinks into despair, as the helicopter they were promised would save them never arrived. And things end up rotting when everyone finds out that the Nagoya mission was planned by Coretto. All the soldiers decide to leave the squad to reorganize and go to rescue Gurren. For his part, the aforementioned is receiving a beating by a vampire. Farid comments that Gurren has two personalities, as he is incomplete due to being in the process of becoming a demon. During the beating, Gurren enters a dream world where he meets his demon and former girlfriend Mihiru. She tells him to give up and hand over his body to her. Gurren agrees and with his new power sends the vampire that was beating him flying. Suddenly, Crew immobilizes Gurren, and asks where Mihiru is. He tells her that she is dead. It is then that Crew tells him that she cannot join him if Mihiru is not there, because before the cataclysm they both made a deal. Gurren then mentions that the final Seraph experiment is taking place at the airport. Hearing that, Crew orders all his soldiers to go to the airport. On the other hand, Gurren's squad meets Coretto. He tells them that the mission was a success and that they can rest. He then orders to release a mysterious container, and that mysterious container murders several soldiers from Gurren's squad. The protagonist's friends, seeing that, get angry and begin to attack Coretto. He tells them with a poker face that losing a few comrades is a fair price for saving humanity. And just when Gurren was going to attack Shinoa, Yu appears and protects her. A few minutes later, Crui's vampire army appears and fights Coretto's army. During the confrontation, the protagonist meets Gurren, who attacks him because he is possessed by his demon. For good luck of the protagonist, Mika protects him. Gurren immediately defeats Mika, demonstrating his superiority. Following that, Coretto orders him to start the plan. It is then that Gurren orders his sword to absorb the blood of vampires and humans. The protagonist asks him what this is all about, and Gurren replies that the Awari is not a seraph. This is how Gurren kills humans and vampires alike. Meanwhile, the creature inside the container uses its pointy things to absorb the blood of the fallen. Thus, the container explodes and a girl with angel wings emerges, who says that she will purge the humans and then plays the fifth trumpet. Coretto orders his soldiers to contain the power of the angel. To all this, the girl is called Mirai. With her they experimented to create the Awari no Seraph. Not to mention that the little girl is the younger sister of the redhead with glasses. Well, the fact is that the redhead is enraged and tried to attack Gurren, who without hesitation plunges his sword into his stomach. Yu, seeing all of the above, also gets angry with Gurren, and to no one's surprise he ends up the same way, with a sword stuck in his stomach. The fact is that a demon called Abaddon comes out of Mirai. Coretto comments that said creature was born after the girl played the golden trumpet, adding that humanity finally managed to dominate the Awari no Seraph, or Seraph of the End. As you prefer to say it, the important thing is that this creature will probably kill all the protagonist's loved ones. With that in mind, our hero plunges his sword into his chest and travels to the dream world where he meets his demon. She tells him that she can't help him, as her power is not enough to defeat the Seraph of the End. Yu tells him that he already knows. With a resigned voice she tells him that then he betrayed her and played the trumpet to make a deal with the angels. Yu apologizes and moves towards the golden trumpet. She tells him that it's a bad idea because if he does he'll lose all of his humanity. Our young man answers that he doesn't care. This is how the protagonist blows the trumpet and transforms into a mega-strong divine creature. Coretto orders his soldiers to finish off Yu. However, the latter defeats them as if nothing had happened. During the fight, Coretto's right hand tells him that the protagonist has become the second trumpet, the King of Salt. With his new powers our hero defeats the Seraph of the End. Now his goal is to purge humanity for all its sins. However, his demon prevents him from doing so because it knocks him unconscious. At the same time, Farid takes advantage of the situation to overthrow Queen Crew and take her place. Meanwhile, the protagonist's friends, including Mika, help him escape from Coretto and his men. 4 months later, We see how the demonic army continues to mobilize, including Gurren and Coretto. At the same time, Farid receives a visit from Lestkar, one of the most powerful vampires in existence. For his part, the protagonist and his friends find refuge near the beach. Now our hero's goal is to save the redhead's sister and rescue Gurren.